Brought to you by Williams. We make clean energy happen.
I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, Flexport CEO Ryan Petersen on how businesses reacted to tariffs last week.
It's very hard for me to imagine that the deals that are on the table right now, the duty rates that are out there today, are what's the new normal forever.
Founder and CEO of Colossal Biosciences, Lamm, on the company's quest to bring back the Woolly Mammoth.
Yeah, there was a Wikipedia page up and memes within the first 2 hours.
And as always, keeping tabs.
I'm just baffled as to how the Minecraft movie is making this much money.
But first, here's the download. The news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
After nearly a week of turmoil in the markets following the Trump administration's announcement of sweeping tariffs, how did you celebrate your Liberation Day, Yaz? The president has backed off that policy in a Truth Social post Wednesday afternoon. Reciprocal tariffs will be paused for 90 days, leaving a 10% flat tariff on all countries except for China. Tariffs on China will be raised to 125%. At least that's where it stands as of recording this. There will no doubt be more updates to this story. Keep a tab open to fastcompany.com to stay up to date. I swear, if I have to rewrite another tariff download story, it's everything's
we did this
crazy.
Interview yesterday and things have already changed.
Yeah.
If you haven't already decided which TikTok alternative you're going to decamp to if the app is ever actually banned, good news. Now there's another choice that's throwing its hat in the ring. Skylight has the financial backing of Mark Cuban, among others, and more importantly, it's built on Blue Sky's open source decentralized AT protocol.
It also looks exactly like TikTok, which makes me a little nervous for them.
That's what Blue Sky did with Twitter.
Yeah, that is true. That's kind of Blue Sky's whole thing, I guess. Earlier this week, Toby Lutke, CEO of Shopify, preemptively leaked an internal memo sent to his employees via his X account. The memo was titled, "Reflexive AI Usage is Now a Baseline Expectation at Shopify." What does that mean? Well, it goes through a number of directives and justifications, but the most concerning passage for those concerned about AI replacing jobs directed employees to, before asking for more headcount, demonstrate why they cannot get what they need done by using AI.
There wasn't just action on the college basketball courts this weekend. An antitrust lawsuit aimed at fairly compensating college athletes appears near settlement. A federal judge for House versus NCAA, as the case is known, held the final approval hearing on the multi-billion-dollar settlement on Monday. If the settlement gets the green light, it would provide a path for colleges and universities to pay its star players directly from the lucrative proceeds generated from broadcast deals, merchandise, ticket sales, and more. $2.75 billion of the suit would also be distributed to college athletes who played pre-2021 for their name, image, and likeness rights. Additionally, the settlement would stipulate roster caps and a salary cap.
I remember like 10 or so years ago, the conventional wisdom around paying college athletes was like never going to happen. Never going to happen. It's kind of insane to see this happen.
I know.
It's great. I mean, they generate so much money. I mean, just look at the sponsorships you see all over the NCAA courts in March Madness. And finally, sorry if your invite got lost in the mail like mine, but Microsoft celebrated its 50th anniversary last Friday. They had a bunch of events and panels over the weekend. Some were hosted by Brenda Song. That was a thing. Did you see that, Yaz?
No, but sure.
Yeah, it's cool. I love the Brenda Song renaissance that's happening. Shout out to all the Sweet Life of Zach and Cody fans out there. But the festivities were interrupted by some pro-Palestinian Microsoft employees who used the event as an opportunity to speak out against the companies supplying the Israeli army with AI technology. The protesters interrupted speeches, claiming in part that the whole company has blood on its hands. On Monday this week, 2 employees who took part in the protest were fired.
And that's the news you need to know today. So, Josh, what is your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur growing up was always the Stegosaurus. I don't know why. I really was into the Stegosaurus.
I feel like that's like boys like Stegosaurus.
Yeah, that might be. Honestly, like, I could probably name maybe 3 or 4 dinosaur varieties at this point in my life.
Yeah.
It was never a huge thing that I was super into, but I remember being really into stegosauruses for like a short time around age 5. Were you a dinosaur gal?
Yeah, I really like Land Before Time, so...
Oh, yeah. That was definitely a big entry point for kids.
But I always liked, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the Diplodocus? The ones with
The one with
long...
the really thick head?
No, it's the one with the super long neck.
Oh.
Because they were vegetarian, I'm pretty sure, which I thought was nice.
Oh, okay. I think that's nice. Herbivores? Yeah.
Yeah.
Go off, herbivores.
Go off. Yeah, they seem really cute.
Well, nobody's bringing back dinosaurs Jurassic Park style, but there is a company. Yet. Well, maybe. But there is a company trying to bring back the woolly mammoth and some other species, although
there's some controversy.
There's some controversy around this. We'll get into it. But first, we're going to talk about tariffs.
By now, you've probably heard a number of explainers from reporters on reciprocal tariffs that have since been delayed for 90 days. But we wanted to chat with someone whose business is dealing directly with the consequences importers and exporters might face. Ryan Petersen is the co-founder and CEO of Flexport, a multinational supply chain management and logistics company. He spent the last week trying to make sense of these tariffs and talking to his clients about what comes next. Josh and I talked to him on Tuesday afternoon, and of course, on Wednesday, right after we recorded, Trump put a pause on most reciprocal tariffs for 90 days, although he still raised the levy on China. So, Ryan, what was your Wednesday night and Thursday morning like last week? Give us a blow-by-blow account of what happened.
We have all these experts on our team. Flexport's one of the largest customs brokers in the United States, actually probably in the whole world. And so the customs broker helps you file your paperwork and pay your duties, make sure you get everything right. So obviously we're right in the front lines of all of this. And I have this great team of customs brokers who have worked in the industry for like 20 or 30 years. And so I usually just rely on them to understand everything with customs rules and how it all works. And I always, kind of explain like I'm 5 type of thing. But the very interesting thing is when there's something brand new like this, they don't really have any advantage over anyone else. Like, so I just dig right in and start reading it myself, and read it and understand it. Now, there's a lot of them, so they understand some of the nuance and terminology and stuff. So it was like a big, very collective effort to go read these things and find little passages and figure stuff out. And I think we were the first people to notice in the filings when they came out, or at least the first ones to go public with the fact that there was an exemption for semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, that the de minimis had been shut down, which is items under $800 are no longer import duty-free from China and eventually from the rest of the world. And so I was finding these things and then tweeting about them in real time. I know I was one of the first on the semiconductors because one of their NVIDIA's largest shareholders texted me as a hedge fund guy. And he's like, where are you seeing this about semiconductors? I'm like, well... No, I had very real experiences that night of folks who managed billions of dollars and me having an information edge over them. About I should have been trading stocks that day or something.
Yeah.
Was your phone just blowing up with folks like that from NVIDIA and all the different companies that you work with? Just be like, what's happening?
Definitely a bit of that, like a lot of panicked response. I worked until probably 1 a.m. that night, kind of getting a lay of the land. Wrote a blog post myself that's on Flexport's blog right now about the de minimis exemption being shut down.
Yeah, we'll get into that later.
We were ahead before any reporters, so there are no articles about it. So we're like, all right, let's break this news. And then I realized we've got to get our customers together the next morning. So next morning I woke up at 6 a.m. and made a slide deck for a webinar, which you guys told me you watched the webinar. I hate the word webinar, live stream, I like to call it. What we knew, what it means for our customers, what it means for the world, et cetera, kind of trying to get a lay of the land. So pretty chaotic and stressful, but I feed off of stress. That's how my friends would describe me. I like stress.
When you were talking to customers in that moment, what was their biggest concern?
It very much depends on the company. We have a lot of customers where we do the ocean or air freight, and we actually ship it down to Tijuana, and then they do fulfillment from Tijuana to take advantage of this de minimis exemption so that they can import duty-free. And so for those companies, it's pretty catastrophic having it announced that that's going to go away. That's been a huge part of their profit pools. So for that group, that was really catastrophic. And then people importing from China, it took a while for people to assess because on the surface, China got a 34% duty and Vietnam got a 46% duty. So it looked like China came off relatively well in this, but they didn't realize that the 34 gets added to the 20% that was already there that Trump announced in the last couple months and gets added to the 25% from his first term. And then this week announced that there's a 50%. So China's above 100% for pretty much anything. So people who haven't been able to shift manufacturing to other countries are in a really rough spot right now if they're buying from China.
What kind of scrambling have you been doing to get some last shipments done before these tariffs kick in?
We had a big team that worked all weekend. We paid people overtime this weekend and work at 7-day shift because it ends tonight at midnight if the vessel departs. So now it's over, at least on the ocean side. I think air, we're still scrambling to get every last piece of cargo onto a plane and have it take off in time today before midnight U.S. time, U.S. East Coast. But for ships, the vessel has to depart. So it had to get gated into the port 2 or 3 days ago at least. And if you did that, you don't pay these new higher duty rates. So yeah, crazy scramble. And then now we're likely to see a big drop off. We're expecting a huge decline in ocean freight in the short term because companies knew this was coming. So, you buy as much inventory as you could and put it in warehouses in the US over the last few months. So people are pretty well stocked. And then the second piece is there's a very strong sentiment that the deals will get cut. Tariffs will come down from here. If not on China, then at least, they're kind of signaling this with Japan and Korea, maybe some other countries too. So given that, people are like, let's just wait and see. We've got inventory. Let's pause bookings for now. Let's pause shipments and see what happens over the next few weeks and months.
Do you think that's a bit of wishful thinking, though? I mean, I think we should all be out of the prediction market right now, particularly with this administration and tariffs in general. The markets kind of reacted like it wasn't going to be this expansive of a reciprocal tariff or whatever we're calling them now. And then the markets reacted accordingly when it was more expansive than they believed it to be.
Very hard to predict. I agree with you. But one thing we do know is Donald Trump likes to make deals. So
yeah.
I think there's probably going to be some deals made, and hopefully they can make them quickly because, all these things are on some level like the world will be okay. I think a lot of businesses will go bankrupt from this. It's just life. Life is freaking hard. That's one thing I got from my parents when I was young. They told me, whenever I complained about something not being fair, they reminded me life is not fair. But right now, the big problem for businesses is that it's very uncertain. You just don't know what's going to happen next, and you can't make any decisions. You're paralyzed. So talked to a company this morning. They're manufacturing in China. It's very clear that these duty rates don't work for their economics. They're committed. They got to move manufacturing somewhere else, and they just can't do it. So they're going to go, I will just make $0 or lose money for now until there's some clarity. It won't work making their product in America. They've talked to every manufacturer they can talk to in America. They're not ready to start their own factory. Even if they did, they'd have to import the components. So, you can maybe make it in Latin America, maybe make it in Vietnam or somewhere. But until you know what those deals are going to look like, they just don't, they're paralyzed.
I'm curious what businesses or industries are going to be the most impacted by this. And I say because some massive companies obviously have distributed where they're making products, if that makes sense. So they may have, factories in India and China, for instance, that they may be able to shift around.
China really dominates consumer electronics.
Yeah.
They're the best manufacturing country in the world. So if you had the choice, you'd probably manufacture in China if there were no other considerations for most products. That said, their labor cost has gone up. So if it's very low value add beyond just labor, you don't go to China for just cheap labor anymore. And so some things like apparel can be made elsewhere. If it's non-technical, like some of the technical fabrics, technical meaning like some of these like performance stretchy type fabrics, China's still got an advantage in the technology for making those types of things. But if it's just cheap labor you're looking for, then those will be better done elsewhere. But electronics, a lot of companies that we see that are going to be really hard hit here are small business, sadly, who don't have the scale to go be attractive for these contract manufacturers in other countries who are seeing a surge of demand like Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, other places. And they just don't want to waste time with a little tiny company that's showing up asking for like small batches. So people who make apparel that's like a lot of different SKUs with a small number per item, they've just struggled to find manufacturers outside of China that'll be a good fit for them. So those guys are going to get hit really hard. And then the consumer doesn't really care.
Yeah.
I think. You're like, oh, okay, you have to produce in China. I don't care. The other guy doesn't. I'll just buy from him. Maybe it's less intricate, but so, and just generally, I think that everybody's got to raise prices. Let's say you have already moved out of China, you move to a low cost place, but you still have to raise prices, and consumers will. One thing we know is if you charge more, people buy less, and they may shift spend onto other things. They might not buy the backdoor pizza oven and might instead go to a restaurant.
Do you think we're going to see more manufacturing take place in Latin America? I mean, they have only a 10% duty. And was that strategic on the part of the administration or just something that randomly is the case?
One of the great questions coming out of all this, there's a lower duty in Latin America. It looks at first glance, you're like, oh, they want us to produce in Latin America, not in the United States. 10% duty. Latin America is more than 10% cheaper than the US. So they want us to produce down there. And at first I thought that was like grand strategy. Okay, it's going to be our strategic backyard. We're going to manufacture in Latin America, be like this regional powerhouse. Then when you actually look at how the duty rates, how that fell out, it is not based on anything other than the trade deficit of these countries and the ratio of imports to that trade deficit. So Latin America just happens to have better trade deficits with the United States or less trade deficits than other countries, and therefore got lower duty rates. So if it sticks, then yeah, you're going to want to produce in Latin America, but it's very possible. Like I said, there's no certainty. It all could change next week. We just don't know.
So you mentioned Vietnam, and I feel like that was one of the biggest shocks to the public, how high the tariffs were from there. I mean, so walk us through what has gone into calculating reciprocal tariff numbers, and do you have a sense of how they were actually calculated?
They took the trade deficit, so that's I think it's the exports from that country minus our imports that gets you the deficit. And then they divided that by our imports from that country and get you a percent. And that's what they called the other country's tariff rate. It's not their tariff rate at all. And then they divided that by 2 because President Trump said he's being kind. And that gets you the duty rate that we charge them. So it's a formula that doesn't have any bearing at all to, well, there might be some, I'm sure there's correlation there to what barriers of trade exist and currency, but that's where it's calculated. And so that's why you see, countries that it's very interesting. If you look at the map of where this applied, you have some countries like Guyana in South America. It's a big oil exporter, massive oil exporter, and they don't really sell anything to them. And so they get hit with these massive duties because of their oil exports.
Lesotho was another big country with the gems, diamonds and gems, but they don't buy anything from us.
Yeah. If you use that formula, it's going to naturally just punish people who do natural resource extraction because, of course, there's trade imbalances. Like, it's the nature of trade.
So I want to go back to the end of de minimis, which you mentioned earlier. Explain to us what that means and why you think that's kind of an underreported aspect of these tariffs that deserve some more attention.
Well, de minimis, that's Latin, I guess, for under a minimum. I'm not sure. I don't know. The de minimis exemption, many countries have this. The U.S. has the highest in the world of $800. It says that if you import something less than $800 and it's going to the final consumer, the final buyer of the goods, then it's duty free. And so what's happened, if you went back 10 years ago, there were 100,000 parcels a day imported under this exemption. And it was largely mail. You know, you're sending something home to your mom while you're living abroad or something, or vice versa, more likely vice versa. She's sending. It was 100,000 a day. Fast forward now with the rise of technology and especially like e-commerce players in China, technology meaning bundle these shipments together, fly them as air freight, but clear them one parcel at a time in a database system with U.S. Customs, and then hand them to U.S. Postal Service and deliver them. So it's sort of mass market. That's grown to now 4.1 million parcels a day. 40x growth in the last decade of this sector. And the Trump administration has now said, actually, Biden announced they would shut it down, but didn't have a timeline. It was slow. And then finally, Trump shut it down in his first couple of weeks in office and then backed off because the tech systems weren't there. CBP wasn't ready to turn it off. They announced that last week on Liberation Day that May 2nd, it would get turned off officially for China. And then importantly, it would get turned off for the rest of the world as soon as the Commerce Secretary reports to the president that the systems are prepared to do so.
It's a lot of Temu.
Now, does that mean that consumer goods purchases are going to get more expensive? Like, should I buy a couch that was made in China yesterday? Or, how do you think about that?
Yeah, you should. I mean, prices have already started to go up. We've seen 10% price increases on e-com sites already because although they haven't started paying the new tariffs, they know that they will. So you should start charging that price now. And yeah, so I don't know if Apple's raised their price. I was tempted to go to the Apple store after work yesterday. But it was closed when I got there. Yeah, I think prices are going to go up. And iPhone, I haven't seen these reports in a few years, but I remember a few years ago looking like analysts like break it down and say how much is the actual cost. And I think they said it was $400 or something based on the components. The cost is what the duty rate gets applied to.
Gotcha.
Right.
So if it's 100% duty applied to that,
Damn.
it's got to be at least $400 more, or else Apple's going to take a hit on their profit, which they might take a little bit of a hit, but they're not going to eat the whole thing. They're going to pass through some of that through as higher prices, you would assume.
I already spent so much on Severance season 2. I don't think they can take that hit.
So what should businesses be doing and what should they not be doing to prepare for these tariffs? What are you advising?
It's really a difficult position. I mean, I think the first rule I tell people is in a crisis, rule number one is stay calm, because everybody is going to rally around the calmest person in the room. And if you're leading a company and you're freaking out, everybody's going to look to that. And you know, you're not going to get much done if your whole team is freaking out. So even if you're freaking out on the inside, stay calm. And at this point, it's very hard for me to imagine that the deals that are on the table right now, the duty rates that are out there today are what's the new normal forever. Like, if that's true, a lot of companies are going to go bankrupt, and it is what it is. Like, life is really hard and unfair, and you might have to get a job. Like, it's devastating and really sad to say it out loud. But it's just very hard for me to actually believe that that's that's really what's going to happen here. In fact, I spoke to a cabinet member 2 weeks ago who told me that this was the start and not the end of the process, and that there would be negotiations, there would be deals cut, that the rates would he didn't say the rates would come back down, but he said deals would be done. It's possible that the rates go up, is what we've seen with China, that they escalated things. I think for most countries, they're going to be so dependent on U.S. trade that they just can't allow themselves to lose access to our market. You know, they'll have to figure out what it's actually the Trump administration wants from them. But I assume deals will get done. We've already seen European Union, Taiwan, Vietnam, India, Israel, I think Malaysia, I forget. At least those countries have already said they will go fully duty free. Trump said that's not enough, but we're starting a dialogue to go negotiate. So I think it's hard to make a decision in the short term. Medium term, yeah, probably if everything was to stay exactly how it is, then you got to go, all right, let's go try to find some factories in Latin America.
You actually talked about this in the presentation. You said businesses need extremely good record keeping, maybe more than before. Why is that?
Oh, well, it's like your tax, customs is a form of tax, and you got to make sure you pay taxes accurately. The duty rates are changing. You want to be able to make sure you have classified your products correctly. You've got data on everything. Even like these de minimis shipments, for example, those are going to now convert over to regular imports. You have to declare the name of the factory. In the United States, there's 43 government agencies that take an interest in imported products of some kind. And all those de minimis shipments they were ignoring, and now they're going to be taking a real interest in all of them. And so, yeah, having a reliable place to store all this data. Customs ultimately about data and expertise. And so you need great databases and then good advisors that can help you look at it, find opportunity. Things that weren't that important for your business, like if you import a product and you pay the duty, if you later export a product that's the same classification code, you're owed a refund on what you paid on the way in. When you weren't paying duty on the way in, you didn't care. Now you're going to care a lot. Things like your valuation of the goods. So the valuation of the goods is not necessarily just a simple, how much did you pay for them? There's all kinds of complex things that you can do. For example, if you invested a lot in R&D or CapEx, you've contributed to building that product by sending money over for the factory. There's ways to amortize that and reduce your value. And your value times your duty rate is your amount that you owe. So all these things depend on having good records, good data stored in a database. That's a big part of why I think Flexport has become a leader in customs.
Walk us through an example on how tariff rates will basically change consumer goods. I remember you talked about a stainless steel water bottle, and I thought that was very useful.
You'll just see the price of these goods go up. Well, the cost, actually, the one that I don't remember the exact details of that one. I think it was a 55% duty rate. That gets applied here. And then that was, by the way, that was before this, I did that webinar before China announced this extra 50%. So like 105%, if I recall, duty on that product. So if you're buying it for $20 or $10 and you're selling it for 40, might be normal economics. Then now you're buying it for 20 and selling it for If you want the same dollar margin, you're selling it for 50. So that's the simple math. For a product like a couch, it's now 129% duty rate.
Yeah.
So yeah, if some of these businesses are not that high margin. I mean, furniture is not like a super high margin business. So the price has to go up quite a bit. It won't go up 125%. It might go up 50%.
I am curious, I saw an example about couches from Vietnam and how that price might go up. What are the industries where like all their manufacturing is taking place in one country? You talked a little bit about clothing in China. Give me some more examples.
Consumer electronics is the main one. Shenzhen Electronics, world capital for consumer electronics. Shenzhen Electronics market, if you've never been there, is an amazing place. A lot of computers, laptops, modems, all those types of electronics, Wi-Fi routers, televisions, I think mostly. I mean, those are going to get hit really hard. And the reason that it doesn't leave China, one, is there's the manufacturing prowess. They're very good at these things. And two, and very closely related, is there's this whole ecosystem of subcomponent suppliers. And so, it's like this is what they're missing when they say, hey, just bring it to America. If you want to do manufacturing in America, you still need to buy the components because we don't have that ecosystem of all the different subcomponents. It'll take a long time to build that out. And in the meantime, it's made American manufacturers uncompetitive now because they have to import these components and it's raised their costs and it's just punishing these manufacturers. We're a bit like someone who hasn't been to the gym in 25 years and then they just like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym. I remember when I was 20 years old, I used to be able to deadlift,
This is hitting really close to home for me.
And they just try deadlifting and break their, get a herniated hip.
I'm going to ask probably a dumb question. Is there any possible upside here? We've called this a crisis. We know how the market's reacting. We know how business is reacting. Is there any silver lining here?
If interest rates came down, that would be good for a lot of sectors, real estate. It's probably good for service businesses in the United States, restaurants. I mean, if you lead to a global recession, it's not good for anybody.
Do you think we're headed into a global recession? All indicators seem to be up, but
JP Morgan spends a lot of time on this and they said yes. So I don't know. It seems like I don't see how you avoid it if this stuff doesn't change. Like we haven't had a recession, a real one. I mean, you had a COVID dip, which they managed to spend their way out of. If you go back the 10-year period without a recession, there's only been like one since the 1860s.
Wow.
Usually there's a recession every 10 years or so. There's at least one recession. And we've just managed to go since 2008 without a recession. COVID was very brief, like for a month or something. I had to bounce right back. And there's some degree of like recession could maybe be a little bit like a forest fire. Like if you never allow the little small fires to burn, then when it does burn, it can just like really be a tragedy and burn the whole thing down. And so we've been avoiding recession. The Fed's been managing it. Every time there's like any hint of a recession, they print a bunch of money and provide more stimulus. And I don't know, there's some degree to which bad companies shouldn't survive. But when you just change the landscape out from under people, this is not bad companies, just like they were playing by the rules of the game as it was defined. And then all of a sudden you change the rules and people are going to die. So like to have like a little bit more predictability, give us a year's notice so we can set up our supply chains in the right way is probably what our customers would want to say right now.
Yeah, it does suck to be a millennial and not be able to have a job when you graduate and then not be able to
I will say
home.
recession for some business community stuff may be, like a controlled burn. Recession's not good there's a lot of people who would be very hurt by a recession.
My argument is just like, hey, little small doses of these things are
totally
catastrophic.
Sure, if it's avoiding a grand catastrophic thing. Yeah, I understand your point there.
Now, how is this all affecting Flexport's business?
Well, thus far, it's still too early to say, but I mean, we can predict like our revenue is the volume times the price, and both of those are likely to come down. So I think it's going to be pretty impactful. We don't want to sugarcoat it. We've been pretty upfront with our employees. This is going to be a rough period. We're going to have to go work our butts off to serve every customer that we have, do the best job that we can to serve them. On the one hand, the businesses that are booming for us right now are our customs advisory services, help people get refunds from the government when they overpay duties or they do a drawback, like I was saying before, when they export something. So we have a U.S. e-com fulfillment business. Now that these Tijuana and Canada fulfillment centers won't work anymore, that business is booming. So that part of our business is doing amazing. Our air freight, we do a lot of e-com parcels from China. That's going to probably wind down quite a bit. Ocean freight, I've already said we're seeing a pause coming up from a lot of customers' bookings, and we forecast a decline. So mixed bag. I think net it's going to be really a tough year for us. And we got to dig in hard and make sure we're adding every new customer we can and helping people dig in. We're built to last. Like, we've got a really strong balance sheet. So we'll come out the other side of this. And people who survive these types of things end up thriving. We saw in the Black Plague, right, in the 1300s, the people who survived, their wages went way up. So
I wasn't expecting. I was expecting Black Monday after that.
Yeah,
I was expecting a
me too.
1987 reference.
I'm sorry, I went there.
The plague went a little further back. That's the OG recession, some might
Well,
say.
that was caused by global trade. Don't tell Donald Trump, but the Black Plague, all those rats.
Shots fired at the East India Trading Company.
Well, this was great, Ryan. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I know this has been a crazy week for you.
My pleasure. Yeah, I'm happy to. Nobody really wants to talk to their customs broker normally, so.
I did think that. I was like, damn, this is really his time.
Even if it's horrifying on a lot of fronts, at least I added some Twitter followers. So.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
We'll be right back after a quick break, followed by my interview with Ben Lamm, founder and CEO of Colossal Biosciences, the company trying to bring back the woolly mammoth.
As affordable, reliable energy demand increases at historic rates, one company is uniquely positioned to accelerate America forward. Williams. We have 117 years of know-how in powering progress, and we're ready to power the next 100 years of innovation. Learn how our natural gas infrastructure is critical to the future of AI at williams.com.
This week, a genetically modified animal broke the internet. The business behind it, biotech and genetic engineering company Colossal Biosciences, unveiled 3 dire wolves. Those are large white wolves you might remember from Game of Thrones. The animals are a scientific breakthrough, but the unveiling hasn't been without controversy. Some critics have argued that dire wolves are actually more similar to designer dogs. Similar criticisms were levied at the company when they unveiled mice with big fur similar to that of the woolly mammoth. At South by Southwest last month, we talked to co-founder and CEO Ben Lamm about why the company, which has raised $435 million at a valuation of $10.2 billion, is seeking to revive the woolly mammoth and how it plans to save our ecosystem. After the dire wolves, or whatever you want to call them, were unveiled this week, the company received a bunch of backlash, as we mentioned earlier. So we actually hopped on a call with Ben this morning to get his take on what critics are getting wrong. We'll get to that later, but I wanted to start by letting you hear our conversation at South by Southwest about a month ago first. Hey, Ben.
Hey.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So we got to start with Colossal's most recent announcement. Tell me about the woolly mouse.
Well, it is our most adorable announcement to date, given that most of our other announcements are just cells or dying or like dead, decaying, like ancient DNA, right? So given the fact that it's alive and it's super floofy and cute is probably helpful, right? But yeah, we just announced the woolly mouse. We didn't know it would be an internet, sensation. There's a Wikipedia page up and memes within the first 2 hours. So I think we've done something right. And, it's funny, I got quoted by saying, what was great is we made these edits and we got all the intended consequences we wanted, except for one, which we had an unintended consequence of being massively adorable.
Yeah.
And like kids and parents and like teachers are saying, can we adopt them for our school?
Are you going to breed more?
No, we're not breeding more. We're not breeding more. And what's funny is I think the cuteness factor has like overshown like what the actual technological milestones are and why they're important to the company. People are like, it's just a woolly mouse and it's adorable. I guess that's fun, but at the same time, it's not as fun as like everyone also understanding the science behind it.
Well, so tell me the science behind it. Why is it so important?
Yeah, so 2 things are like from an achievement perspective, we're really excited about as it relates to the woolly mouse. Number one is our end-to-end pipeline of taking ancient DNA, doing comparative genomics, identifying genes, editing it in the cells, doing the embryology, and then most importantly, screening the cells so we only produce viable, healthy animals. That end-to-end process that we're using for de-extinction works. We started in September. in October, we had mice, right? And all the mice that were born were edited with exactly the edits we want. We wanted 8 edits and 7 genes. We delivered all of them in what's called multiplex editing. So it's think about instead of making individual genome edits, which is what most people do, we delivered all of the edits at once, had 100% efficiency, and there were no unintended consequences or off-target effects. And then when they were born and the hair grew out, we got exactly the phenotype or physical attribute we wanted. So it showed that our end-to-end pipeline worked. It showed that our QC and quality control at the end really worked so that we ensure that we're only making healthy animals. And then the other thing that's like massively awesome about it for us from an engineering perspective is it now ensures that the edits that we have been making in our Asian elephant cells with the mammoth genes that we've been putting in are the right ones. So we got verification, and then we also got like on the tech, verification on the genome edits, but then we also got super cute mice.
What's the next cute animal you're coming out with on your road to reviving the woolly mammoth?
So people have now asked us for things like, can you give it tusk, which we can't? Can you make a tribble from Star Trek, which we're not? We're in the de-extinction business, not in the create whatever, choose your own. We're not in the biology choose your own adventure business, but people are really, really excited about it. There were some people on X that were saying, they're like, oh, but wait till they grow up and they're going to be massive. They're not going to be massive.
When I saw the news, I was like, dog, has this man never seen Jurassic Park?
Yeah, I believe this may come as a shock to you, but we've heard that before. And what's funny is there are people that are like, didn't they see how Jurassic Park ended?
Yeah, it was bad.
Like, it was also a movie. I also saw how Dune ended. I also saw how like Blade Runner ended and all these other incredible sci-fi movies, right? But yes, we did see Jurassic Park. We are aware of it. And what's funny is we don't think Jurassic Park gets enough credit, right? Because it gets all the, funny memes and all the funny sayings. But at the end of the day, what Jurassic Park doesn't get a lot of is credit for like getting people excited when Mr. DNA explained what DNA is, right? Like, so like kids and like moms and everyone understand that there's these letters that go together and make up DNA, and we as humanity now can edit them.
You're something of a serial entrepreneur. You're kind of a sci-fi nerd. You just mentioned Star Trek.
I do like sci-fi.
Tell me about the genesis of Colossal. Like, how did this all start?
So if someone doesn't like Colossal, they should yell at George Church. He's at Harvard University. It's easy to find his email. Please send him as many emails as possible telling him why you don't like the company. No, but this was George's idea, right? It wasn't my idea. My history is just working with much smarter, women and men than me to go work on cool projects.
Yeah.
I reached out to George. I wanted to work on a synthetic biology company. Like, I thought the idea of compute and access to compute, AI and automation, and then these genome engineering tools where we could engineer life, do directed evolution, do all this really cool stuff.
Give me an example of that.
So a great company that we started last year is called Breaking, and we actually spun it out of Colossal. And it's actually a microbe that is found in the Amazon, and it actually eats plastic, which is awesome, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is, even though it eats plastic, and it doesn't make smaller plastic, right? It doesn't make, microplastics, right?
Like fully digests it?
It actually creates an enzyme that breaks the chemical bonds of plastics. You're only left with like biomass, right?
Gotcha.
Like what's left over from like animals and insects and other things. And so what's crazy about that is like, so that's why we named it Breaking, right? Because it's like breaking, it's breaking down plastic. It's really breaking the chemical bonds, which we thought we were moderately smart when we named it. But what's interesting though is like we took that and it does things where it breaks down plastics in several years that can't break down in over 800 years or even never.
Yep.
But with synthetic biology and computational biology, we can understand how is that enzyme produced? How is it working? And then we can supercharge it by editing the genes that make that enzyme so it makes more. So it's not really making the microbe hungrier or more ravenous. It really just produces more of this enzyme, right? So it can break things down at a higher rate based on surface area of distribution. And so that's one example of how synthetic biology could work. And so going back to George, I reached out to George, asked him about this, and he's like, yes, you should build this company.
And your background, I mean, you've done marketing, like, is that your...
Yeah, I've been mostly in software, right? And so built a bunch of software companies.
Yep.
My last company was a satellite software and defense company. So we did have some space hardware, which is kind of weird and fun and interesting. But I built a company with a partner that was a precursor to large language models. We were about 6 years early and about $45-90 billion early.
Yeah.
But it was still kind of fun and interesting. I was in gaming. So I like the idea of how software can be used for everything from companies to in consumers to defense, right? And so always been mostly in software, but software is just a system. It's
Totally.
just understanding a system.
But you're not a biologist. And I guess that's how you end up linked.
But I also, I also didn't understand anything about space or defense before my last business, right? And so my goal and kind of like what I feel like my job is to like bring much smarter people together and kind of be like a service function for them and help them. So I asked George, like, I'm curious because I have ADD. And so I asked him, I said, what else you got? And so he started walking through all these crazy projects his lab's producing, because his labs produce some of the most innovative companies in the world have come from George's lab. And I was kind of overwhelmed, and it was like getting to the end of the call. And I just said, George, if you had one project with unlimited capital, what would you have? What would you do? And without skipping a beat, inflection in his voice changed, everything. And he was like, I would work to bring back the woolly mammoth. I'd reintroduce it to the Arctic to help the ecosystem. I'd build new technologies for conservation and take some of those technologies and apply the ones that are applicable to humans. I'd monetize those. And then the call was over. And so then I was actually here in Austin when that happened, and I stayed up all night, and there was this weird through line in every interview George did where he was talking about other projects and people would bring back the mammoth. So I felt like there was some sense of the universe or destiny wanting George to bring back the mammoth.
Tell me about raising money for this, because you've raised a lot.
Yeah, so we raised $435 million for Colossal Biosciences, the private company. We've also raised $50 million for our foundation, the Colossal Foundation, because all the tech that we make on the path to de-extinction, we make available for free to conservation, right? Because we want to help stop the extinction crisis. The first couple pitches, like the pitch deck was bad. It was bad.
You didn't just have like a picture of a woolly mammoth?
Yeah, that's basically the pitch deck.
Oh,
like,
nice.
The pitch deck was like a picture of George.
I feel like I could do this.
A couple business guys. And it's like, okay, we don't have a contract with Harvard. We don't have access to the IP. We don't have any scientists on our team. But George said he can make a mammoth. Harvard said they'd do a deal with us around that and the IP. And we're pretty sure that will make money. That was the pitch deck. And I took it to a couple of my software businesses, including some very notable investors. And he was like, if you're done working on defense tech and you want to do another software company, I'll fund you right now. He's like, what do you want? He's like, I'll fund you as much money as you need to go do something different if you're just interested in this other company. He goes, but you just shouldn't do this. He goes, you have a good reputation. This is just a bad idea. And he goes, you should just like donate to his lab as like a hobby. And I was like, no, I really want to go do this. And so I had a couple people tell me it was going to ruin my reputation. And I was like, well, as a tech entrepreneur, I've said several times, believe it or not, I'm doing this because I want to make an impact and change the world. And I felt like George gave me an opportunity to attempt it. And I felt like I could never say that phrase again if I didn't pursue this. And so I explained that to one of these investors, and he's like, okay. And then he came around. And so he wrote a check. I was like, oh, this terrible deck got me a investment. And then we just continued, right? And we raised an initial $8 million very quickly. And then while we're in stealth mode, we then raised another $8 million on a note. We announced the company publicly. It went viral. We had 22 billion media impressions. And then we had a lot of people throwing term sheets at us for our Series A.
How are you going to make money? Because you have a lot of investment. I'm guessing investors want some kind of return.
When you think about capital and you think about the capital markets and how you return on investment, return of investment and return on investment. One of the things I've learned over my career is like really looking for the right investors, right? So we try to focus on long-term investors, right? Like
a woolly mammoth takes 22 months to gestate.
Yeah. That's woolly mammoth, right? And so I think we did a really good job of identifying investors that had evergreen capital, had their own capital, and were long-term focused, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is we built kind of, and we're learning every day, but we've built kind of a 3-phase monetization model. The first is exactly what you said, except not with mice, it's technology. So we've spun out 2 companies publicly, Breaking, which I mentioned, and Form Bio, which is a computational biology platform for human healthcare. We have 2 others in the works, and we have a third we actually have spun out and raised money for, but we're not talking about quite yet. And so anything that we can monetize that has an application to industrial use cases, defense, or human healthcare, we're spinning out and making money off of, right? But that really creates option value. It doesn't create really revenue. So that's one. 2 is we are starting to work with governments and in helping them understand. You're probably pretty familiar with the open source model, right? Where it's like, so our view, and is it works in most open source, like people build software, they build a community, people love the software, but then XYZ giant enterprise comes to you and says, hey, our developers have used this. It's cute. It's great. But you built it. We need you or your sister company to go implement this at scale. So while we're making our technologies available for conservation and to governments are now coming to us and saying, hey, we love this. We love what you're doing. You're working with several of our government partners and our NGOs here. If we gave you this much money, could you shorten the time for us to be successful? And in one project that we're working on, which I can't announce yet publicly, it's about $300 million investment that they're working on for conservation, which I'm super happy they're doing that. And they're trying to get to something, and that something will take them probably 23 years is what, in best case scenario, to get enough of this breedable of this population. For $75 million, we can do it in 3 and also deliver better products that are better for the environment with more engineered genetic diversity. We can take 2 decades out of saving a species for them, and they can use our technology for free, but they would just prefer us to do it, right? And so we have so we're starting to work with governments on that. And then long term, there is actually a huge amount of money in carbon credits, the newly formed biodiversity credits, and most likely where, Lloyd's of London and PwC and everyone's kind of trending is probably nature credits. And so we'll make billions of dollars in ARR just in the annuities of our animals, putting them back in the wild, even without anyone ever seeing them.
Gotcha. Why start with the woolly mammoth?
When we were thinking about starting the company, we wanted to start with the hardest, most insane project we could have.
And you thought what about the T-Rex or the saber-toothed tiger?
So I'm well, we can come to T-Rexes and saber-tooths here in a second, but like George had been working on the computational biology side for the mammoth for quite some time. There was an ecological benefit for rewilding the Arctic. And then there's this halo effect. So the flip side of not doing developmental biology research on elephants, the fact that there wasn't any there, which is painful for us, means that there's an opportunity to do stuff to help elephants. But you asked about dinosaurs.
Yeah.
So dinosaurs lived a long time ago. They did not live at the same time as mammoths.
Woolly mammoth. Yeah.
Yes. So our mammoth genomes are about 3,500 years old, all the way back to 1.2 million.
And I'm guessing they're frozen in a way that is
they're preserved in a way, right? Where they haven't fossilized, they haven't turned to rock, right? So some of this is coming from the petrous bone, some of this is coming from teeth and tusk and others. Parts of it is from actual frozen tissue, which is great. So there is no dino DNA. Amber's not a good storage vehicle for DNA, not that we've tried. So there is no dino DNA, right? So I don't think it's possible to bring back a dinosaur. On the saber-tooth on the other side, which we're not working on, there's really kind of 2 prominent ones, species. There's Homotherium and Smilodon. Smilodon have the more exaggerated phenotypes or physical teeth that we think of.
That's why they're called the Smilodon.
Yeah. I hadn't thought that, but I'm going to steal that and use that. And I'm not going to give you credit. I'm just going to use it.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's not my currency.
Good.
In terms of the process of bringing back a woolly mammoth, I'm guessing, does it gestate within an elephant? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So the overall process, then we can get to gestation, is we take a bunch of this ancient DNA, which massively sucks and it's super fragmented. It's little pieces. So think of like getting the worst puzzle ever.
Yeah.
Where someone like stole pieces and then they put it in the wrong box, where you think you're like making this beautiful picture of like a pyramid and it's really a daisy. Right. So that's kind of what we do. And so we have to use a bunch of software and technologies in order to assemble ancient DNA. Then you have to compare it to the closest living relative. Coming from software, I thought, we'll just plug it into the GCP of species. Yeah. So that doesn't exist. Right. And so we had to then go get elephant cells and actually create reference genomes for elephants. I just assumed everyone had already done this. Like, why has everyone done like the 23andMe of all species? Like, why is that not done? So then once you do all of that work, which should already exist, you do comparative genomics to understand what genes made a mammoth, what has been fixed over time, specifically with enough genetic divergence over 1 million plus years in our mammoths. We know exactly what genes made a mammoth. And then we start to engineer those into cell lines. Once you do that, and I'm making it very, very simple, and you test the traits work, we do that partly with these woolly mice and other ideas like stem cell differentiation. So we actually have growing elephant hair in labs. It's kind of weird with organoids. So I will promise you, not as cute as a woolly mouse. So we decided to show that one versus the other one, right? And then once you get to an embryo, you go through a process where it's called somatic cell nuclear transfer, basically dollies, the sheep, only now with like lasers and robotics versus like the Stone Age tools they were using in the 90s, right? And so we take the somatic cell, the nucleus from the somatic cell and put it into that germ cell, and then you implant it using like IVF, right? But what's crazy, once again, that doesn't exist for elephants. So we have to solve all of that. But that's one of the reasons why we raised a lot of money, is so that we could build the system and not try to do this in a linear sequential fashion. We're solving elephant IVF right now in oocyte retrieval while we're making the edits.
This is a real crazy question to ask, and I don't actually know where I'm going with this, but
I love that.
do you believe in God?
I do believe in God.
How do you square it with your work? How do you think about this?
In what capacity?
Just like you're recreating a species. You know what I mean?
I think regardless of, who people, I think regardless of how people believe this world came to be, or believe what's next, or whatever. Yeah,
I'm not saying, are you a creationist, right?
No. But I think it's an important point about the question. It's that regardless of how you think this world came to be, I kind of think that we have a steward of it. Humans and our technologies are the peak of what we understand to be the biggest apex predators on the planet, right? And we have shown that technology is kind of the peak of our peak right now, at least for today. And that could change, I don't see how, but right now I think technology is our peak. And so I think that we have a moral obligation, regardless of how you think this world came to be, to take care of it. I'm an eternal optimist, so I do believe that people want to create things, right? And so I would argue that, if you truly believe in humanity, which I do, then we should explore the stars. We should build technologies to cure cancer. Or we should create artificial wombs. We should do all of these things, right? Because I think it's in our longing to explore and our longing to be able to create. And so, so I actually don't have a reconciliation issue with my belief in God, or that the technologies that we're doing could help. I also believe in evolution. And so I don't have any issue with reconciling those.
And here's the next interview from this morning, where we asked Ben what all the critics are getting wrong about the direwolves.
I just say those people are dumb and need more. They need to do more stuff. It's fine. Look, I believe that everybody has a right to their opinion, right? We've said from day one, and I've talked to you about this before, that we are doing functional de-extinction, right? We're trying, it's on our website. People go to our website, like de-extinction, and it explains that there's a thing called functional de-extinction. The IUCN, which is like the Species Council for the World, has actually 5 years ago put out a thing saying that de-extinction means developing proxies for this. And so I often ask people over the last couple of days, is like, did you see Jurassic Park? Because they love to compare us to Jurassic Park.
Yeah, of course, we did that.
Was Jurassic Park a movie about dinosaurs? And they're like, of course it was. It's like, was it? Were they dinosaurs, or were they genetically modified organisms like birds that had like reptilian DNA and dino DNA and all this other stuff? So people don't realize this, but mammoths and direwolves are genetically modified elephants. That's just what they are. And the sad thing that I'm dealing with right now is I don't care, because that's a semantic argument. It's a stupid argument. We've said from day one consistently that we are going to do a lot of computational analysis and then identify the core genes that made a mammoth or a direwolf or a dodo and engineer them back into its closest living relatives. Because a direwolf is 99.5% a gray wolf. And so it's like, you're just redoing dumb stuff. It's exactly the same if you just go redo the exact same thing over and over again. So there serves no purpose. So we really just want to go focus on that kind of 0.5%, if you will, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, when you think of the core genes of a direwolf, or some of the things you edited for, they obviously have the large size. They have the white hair. Those are very apparent. What are some of the other core genes? Like, how do you define them as really different from a gray wolf?
Well, we didn't even know they were white. Yes, they're white in Game. One of them is white in Game of Thrones, but we didn't even know they were white. Like, that came from, and that was one of the pushbacks, is people have said, "Oh, but they were red." That's dumb. Once again, that's because somebody saw a paleo artist rendition of the direwolf that was red. But direwolves weren't red. And I'm not saying all direwolves are white, but we have a 72,000-year-old skull and a 13,000-year-old tooth. So we have about 60,000 years of genetic divergence between that, and both of those were white. So I'm not saying all direwolves were white, but we know that between this lineage, they were white. And so that's something that's new. And so what we did is we believe at Colossal that de-extinction, following the IUCN's definition of de-extinction, and following what Jurassic Park said is the standard de-extinction, is it's really about rebuilding extinct species for today, and which you and I have talked about. And it's also really about de-extincting the core genes that drive phenotypes. Like there's a lot of other genes that we could have engineered in to the gray wolf cell line, but it won't make it more of a dire wolf, right? And it also, every time you make edits, there's risk. And so what people don't realize, and we now have 500 times more data on dire wolves than anyone else in the world. We're submitting a scientific paper about it today, actually. We were planning to submit it in parallel to the announcement, but the New Yorker broke the embargo. And so all these people are...
I remember seeing it first on the New Yorker's Instagram, and I was like, I'm not seeing this anywhere else.
But you have to understand, people are like, but how do we know dire wolves were white? And I was like, we have a paper. And they're like, you didn't give us the paper. I was like,
yeah,
because they broke the embargo. Like,
got it.
They broke the embargo. Like, what do you want me to do? And so now we're sending the paper out to everybody because everyone's calmed down for a second. And people will realize that Colossal has about 500 times more data than anyone else in the world on dire wolves. Our team, for the last year and a half, has been doing computational analysis on a data set that's 500 times more than anyone's ever had. So I assure you, we know more about what made a dire wolf genetically than anyone else on the planet. And so when people just say it's not a dire wolf because they were closer to jackals, that's incorrect. They were actually closer to wolves. Mm-hmm. The old data from 6 years ago said that they were closer to jackals because that's the data that they had, but they had very little data. So for us, I don't care if people call it a dire wolf or they call it a genetically modified wolf or they call it Colossal's dire wolf. For Colossal's purposes, and based on the IUCN's definition and the global definition of de-extinction that's on our website under the de-extinction tab, these are dire wolves, right? So if you think that the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park were dinosaurs, then these are dire wolves. If you think these are genetically modified birds in that movie, well, then guess what? These are genetically modified wolves.
I understand the sort of evolution process between a dire wolf to a wolf. I am curious about the sort of...
It's actually a pretty complicated evolutionary path.
No, but I'm thinking about like the woolly mammoth to mice path. That is like more confusing to me, if that makes sense. When you think about a mammoth versus a woolly mouse, did you just engineer some of the characteristics into the mouse?
So the mouse project was about testing phenotypes, right?
Got it. Okay.
The whole goal was to test if the coat color, the hair thickness, the way the hair grows, and the fat metabolism based on diet and exposure to cold will change its fat metabolism. So that was
Got it. So it wasn't like that makes sense.
Yeah, and by the way, in one of the funny things like that I saw yesterday was there was an article that said in the woolly mice they didn't even put mammoth genes in that. And it's like,
yeah, that's what's come up a bunch of times.
We said that in the press release. That's not a gotcha. We told you that. There's 200 million years of genetic divergence between a mouse and an elephant. And we think that it's unethical to just stick random DNA and stuff. And even though academic labs do that all day long, we think that that's not what we're trying to do. We spend a lot of time on the computational analysis, right? Because for us, the less edits that you can make, the less risk to the animal. And so we made the mouse equivalent edits, which we said in our press release, in our scientific paper, and in every single thing. And now people are like, they didn't even put mammoth genes. Like, but we said that. Like, that's exactly. We don't think that those would have been compatible with life. And so why would you just make a bunch of dead embryos? Like, that seems like a weird exercise.
So how would you respond to the idea that if people begin to think we can easily reverse extinction, threats to endangered species won't seem so dire? And I know that you do some a lot of conservation work and research.
All of the technologies that we make available for conservation, number one. And two, we have a foundation that also funds additional conservation aspects. So there's not technology that we make that we don't give to the world for free for conservation purposes. I think that doing nothing is a choice. Right now, if we do nothing, we're going to lose up to 50% of all biodiversity between now and 2050. we need to do things that are more important and more radical. And, you can build thoughtful yet disruptive technologies at the same time. And one of the things that's crazy about this whole direwolf announcement is that there's only 15 red wolves in the wild from 12 founder lines. We cloned and made made 4 more red wolves. We actually made more red wolves than direwolves. No one cares. We are going to lose up to 50% of biodiversity, yet no one stops and does anything, right? And then we need new tools and technologies for conservation. Even the conservation community will fight that statement because that makes them feel like they're losing. But spoiler alert, we are losing. We are losing this battle against biodiversity, about lost biodiversity. And so we have to build new tools and technologies. But in the we literally cloned 4 red wolves and we invented a new technology. So you don't have to anesthetize the animal or take skin biopsies. You can literally take a blood draw and isolate EPCs in the blood and clone from that because they're only semi-differentiated. And it's an animal welfare. It's a huge step for cloning. It's a huge step for animal welfare, for cloning, for using cloning. And it's also incredible that we increased the genetic diversity of the red wolf population by 25%. And we made 4 more red wolves of the 15. And everyone's like, but it's not called a dire wolf.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what about that? Man, so you asked about conservation. We try to get people to care about conservation, but no one wrote about the red wolves. And the Red Wolf Project to me is as magical as the dire wolf, but nobody wants to talk about.
The last question I have for you is, your co-founder George Church mentioned a while ago that de-extincted woolly mammoths could be used for tourism, meat, hair, maybe even legal ivory. Do you worry about animal exploitation? How do you think about this stuff ending up in zoos? How do you think about that?
I mean, George is George, right? If you ask George anything, my conversation with George about Alpha Centauri are probably the weirdest because he's like, oh, you just have to do these 4 things and we could be at Alpha Centauri. But some of them are really hard. But that's just the way his mind thinks, right? Mm-hmm. And so he probably means we could grow ivory and stuff like that in a lab. That's just George's beautiful mind is just all over the board of these things. But, our goal is to rewild them back into the wild. Now, I will say he's right about many things, one of which is ecotourism, right? And so, we've had northern states of America, as well as Mauritius, say that they believe that there will be a positive impact to tourism based on this, right? They said that it will significantly increase tourism. But, I think that if you get to see animals, not in zoos, but if you get to see animals back in, and I'm not in any way against zoos, there's been actual really interesting data that's shown that early exposure of kids to a diversity of animals that they're not going to see in their front yard or in their suburb, but when they see them in zoos, they have a deeper appreciation for conservation and nature. So I'm not against zoos, but there's a lot of great zoos. There's also a lot of bad zoos out there. Yeah. And so what I can tell you is, but if you see animals back in their natural habitats, and there's a way that local communities can benefit from that, and local governments can benefit from that, and it can protect those animals as well as other animals, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Got it. That makes sense.
Like you see in Africa, like with Kruger National Park and other stuff, right? That money then goes to help feed education, feed people and whatnot.
Yeah. So you're not going to create a legal ivory trade that involves
no, I don't know what. Yeah. A lot of times George gets asked weird questions out of context and stuff. And then they're like, oh, let's it's the media hype cycle, right? It's like, oh, this is the story. No, we are not making it. I actually haven't heard that one before, so that's a fun new one.
Well, this was great. Those are pretty much all our questions. Thank you so much for hopping on the phone again and giving us all this additional context.
Yeah, always. It's fun, and like I said, it's been, there's about 11 different ways to classify a species. None of the people agree with any of them. And so it's crazy to me, if you look, we kind of fall into the phenotype classification, which is a classification of species. And so many people believe that polar bears some people believe that polar bears and brown bears should be considered the same species because they can interbreed. But if you look at a brown bear and you look at a polar bear, while they're very close genetically and while they also can interbreed, which is a different definition of speciation, one is Arctic adapted with Arctic adapted and aquatic traits and one isn't. Yet they mate all the time and produce offspring. And so if you think a polar bear is a polar bear and a brown bear is a brown bear, then by that definition, which is one of the accepted of the 11 different ways of contradictory ways, I should say, of speciation classification, well, then our direwolves are direwolves, right? And so, but I think the biggest thing is people can argue and people can call whatever they want. We can call, it can be the Gulf of America, it can be the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's still a body of water right there. And at the end of the day, the team at Colossal has achieved what many thought was impossible by bringing back lost genes that are driving phenotypes of a lost species from a 72,000-year-old skull.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's any question this is a massive scientific achievement. So congratulations.
Yeah, it's cool. It's fun. It's fun. I also think that Chip and Dale are amazing. So
yeah, well, they're all very cute.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Take care, Ben. Thanks so much.
All right. Bye.
Okay, we're back and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now. And Josh, it's just us this week.
Yeah.
What are you keeping tabs on?
I'm keeping tabs on the opening of the Minecraft movie.
Have you been to see it?
No, of course not.
I don't know. It's just very successful, could be you.
Clearly, I might have been one of the people who led to them opening to $157 million on their opening weekend.
I literally don't know what Minecraft is. I don't want to know. It's fine. I don't need the explanation.
I won't explain
it.
Well, if you know, you know. Hashtag IKYK.
IKYK.
I don't know. I'm not good with acronyms, clearly. No, it was projected according to, I was listening to The Town. I love listening to The Town. They were talking about $60 million predicted gross opening weekend. To beat that by
crazy
$97 million is insane. And I feel like the big loser here is Snow White, which did not open to $157 million. I mean, this is crazy. It's a crazy number that they opened to. That's all I have to say about that. I'm just baffled as to how the Minecraft movie is making this much money. Anyways, what are you keeping tabs on?
So I've been obsessed with The Pit. Have you seen that show?
I haven't watched The Pit yet. It looks really good.
I'm so glad to see Noah Wyle back in Scrubs on my screen. And I just think it's great writing, great performances, really smart. And I saw the hot doctor with the sort of cleft chin in Fort Greene Park recently. So that was really nice.
Are medical dramas having a renaissance? Isn't there a few others coming out?
I think there's one.
Well, there's Dr. Odyssey.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Odyssey is more than a medical drama.
Yeah. Not just a medical drama.
It's the craziest show ever made.
I need to watch. I mean, it's Ryan Murphy, right?
Yeah. I've watched 2 episodes and I was
yeah.
The first episode, I was they totally jumped the shark. What could they possibly do more in this season?
You're actually not talking, you're not talking figuratively. They literally jumped over a shark.
No, there's one on Netflix, and then I think Grey's Anatomy is coming back for its 50th season.
I feel like Grey's Anatomy needs to do what The Walking Dead does and just keep spinning off random offshoots of it.
I don't even
fear the Grey's Anatomy. The Grey's Anatomy Book of Carol.
I have been watching the new Ellen Pompeo show about the family that adopted child who was potentially a teen.
Oh, yeah. That also seems like a Ryan Murphy show, but it's not.
But it's not.
Right?
Mark Duplass is really good in it.
I love Mark Duplass.
I'm such a big fan, but if you watch the documentary, the guy he plays is has this such a strange way of talking and being, and he really captured it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so into that.
Yeah.
I need more TV to watch. I've just been watching Top Chef recently. It's just such a great watch.
Weirdly, a lot of people have told me they're watching Top Chef. I think it's just a comfort.
It's a comfort watch. It's a good comfort watch that's less stressful than Real Housewives or some of the other Bravo-verse shows. It's just people cooking.
Let me tell you, The Pit, unbelievably stressful.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I think that's why I'm hesitating on that. Same thing with that and adolescence.
Yep. And that's it for Most Innovative Companies. Our show is produced by Avery Miles and Blake Odom with help from Sam Gebauer and Hawa Atori, editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is Josh Christensen. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll see you next week.